To be or not to be? That is the question.
Whether 'tis nobler in mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, do you keep your head down and just take it, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing, end them? It's a far more confronting and radical speech than we've been taught.
Riz Ahmed, actor, writer, Oscar winner, on his latest film, Hamlet.
We're all grieving this illusion that the world had some semblance of fairness
You mean
and
because
justice.
of what's happening in the news?
Because of what's happening in the world, yeah, absolutely.
In what
It does
way?
feel like the old order is falling apart, doesn't it? You know, we live in a world where you just didn't do certain things, you didn't say certain things, where people in public office would conduct themselves in a certain way, where there was accountability. These things are crumbling.
From Bloomberg Weekend, this is the Mishal Husain Show. Shakespeare's Hamlet is more than 400 years old, a play that contains some of the most famous lines in the English language. How does it speak to us today? A new and radical take has come from the British actor, writer and producer Riz Ahmed.
As conscience does make cowards of us all.
Who in recent years has combined the more art house project with the big budget world. He was Oscar nominated for Sound of Metal, a film I loved. He was in the Star Wars prequel Rogue One. He has a new film coming up with Tom Cruise. And aside from Hamlet, his other current project is a series on Prime Video called Bait, a black comedy about an actor on the cusp of a life-changing role.
Sharp, are you going to be the next James Bond?
What?
But Riz Ahmed has long been interesting beyond his on-screen work. It's nearly 10 years since he made a speech in the UK Parliament about race. He's written about his experience as a Muslim with British intelligence, US immigration and airport security. In this conversation, we talk about creativity and politics, about family life, because he recently became a father. And first, about being Hamlet, a part he dreamt of since his teens and a plot he believes is evergreen.
I think the thing with a timeless story like Hamlet is that it always feels timely. It never goes out of fashion, right? It's about family and love and loyalty and loss and how do you do the right thing. These are timeless themes. They will always feel relevant. But I can't help but feel that it's actually more relevant now than ever. I think there's actually a reason why it's bubbling up in the collective kind of unconscious actually at the moment. You know, you've had our film Hamlet, you've had Hamnet out as well, and you've also had Grand Theft Hamlet. I don't know if you're aware of this. Grand Theft Auto meets Hamlet. It's a play staged in the video game world. I think the reason why we're turning to this story right now is because Hamlet as a character, I think, is going through a version of what we all are. At the moment, he's grieving the illusion that the world was a fair place. You know, that's really what's happening. He's grieving the loss of his father, yes, but his father represented a certain way of doing things, perhaps flawed, but you know, not as shamelessly unjust, not as brazenly kind of corrupt as the regime that his kind of uncle sets up. And so I think we're all grieving this illusion that the world had some semblance of fairness and justice.
Because of what's happening in the news?
Because of what's happening in the world, yeah, absolutely. It does feel like the old order is falling apart, doesn't it? You know, we lived in a world where you know, so you just didn't do certain things, you didn't say certain things, where people in public office would conduct themselves in a certain way, where there was accountability. You know, we came off the back of the Second World War, setting up international systems, multilateral organizations. These things are crumbling, and so yes, that's bring it to the micro specificity of the news cycle, but to bring it back to the emotional level, which is where I hope my work kind of operates, I think we're all feeling a sense of shock and grief and loss, you know, that the world was a fair place. And actually, to take the kind of parallels further, just like Hamlet, we're actually being gaslit about it. We're actually being told that there's nothing wrong, this is business as usual and how things should be.
A new normal.
Yeah, when we're feeling powerless in the face of it. And actually, ultimately, Hamlet really realizes, like I think many of us are, that we're complicit in it. we're complicit in the new regime of injustice. We're feeding the fire and the algorithmic fuel, of outrage that seems to be kind of characterizing our politics.
Well, in Hamlet's case, he's driven mad by the wrongs that he sees around him. It understandably absolutely consumes him.
I always think that one of the central questions of the play is it the world that's gone crazy or is it me? That's certainly how I think we're all feeling at the moment. It feels like we're living in a very unstable time, just as Hamlet was. And actually, I think there's some solace we can gain from turning to these, canonical stories at this time, realizing actually we've been through this before. We're not the first people to feel this way. There's an element of hope, I think, and we can feel a little less alone in that grief.
You've been thinking about doing Hamlet for a long time, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
How long?
I first had the idea very precociously when I was about 17. And the reason is I got a government-assisted place to a private school where I felt very much like an outsider for many different reasons. And I had an inspirational English teacher called Mr. Roseblade. He took me under his wing. He was a white, middle-aged Jewish guy from Wolverhampton, seemingly nothing in common, but he spoke fluent Punjabi. And he just had this kind of connection to me and other boys who felt like outsiders in that institution.
Because there were very few brown kids in this school?
I think it was a class thing. I think it was also just something about my personality. I think in retrospect, I realized I was probably very ADD and I had to kind of push back and didn't do very well with rules. So I was always getting into trouble. And he gave me this play and said, I know you think Shakespeare is everything you're on the outside of. There's this stuffy establishment kind of canon. But actually, this character in the heart of this play, the most famous, revered play in British culture, he feels like an outsider as well. So much so, he doesn't even want to be in this play. He's stuck in a revenge tragedy and he's not sure he wants to take revenge. And so he gave me this play, and in it, I found myself, like so many people have before and since. And more than just the kind of emotional similarities to how I was feeling as a teenager, I found something I really didn't expect, which is I found massive parallels with my own lived experience as a Brit-Asian. And it was really mind-blowing to me to see that, hang on a minute, this is a story where it's about who you can and can't marry. It's about everyone squabbling over the family business. It's where ghosts and spirituality are part of your lived experience. And there's even a kind of tradition in Jewish culture and in South Asian culture that is a central part of the story, which is if your brother dies and you yourself are unmarried, you may end up marrying your sister-in-law. It's a way of protecting the orphans. And so all of these elements made me think, wow, actually this story's for me and I'm not on the outside of this. It really reframed for me who can be in the stories at the heart of our culture and who those stories belong to. And so back then as a 17-year-old, I had this kind of dream of trying to democratize this play and kind of crack it open for a wider audience.
But in some ways, you've made parts of it more elusive to some audiences in that there are parts of the dialogue and entire speeches which at times are in Hindi. So sometimes the English speaker is struggling to access some bits of it. So I think you've both democratized it and in setting it within a British-Asian family, you've introduced a different dimension.
I wouldn't say it obscures it for me personally. The feedback I've had is that non-Hindi speakers absolutely adore the speeches that we've kind of translated into Hindi, because I think what people connect to more than their similarity to their experience is specificity. If something feels authentic, if something feels specific enough, that's what pulls people in, and then they're able to find themselves in it. So yes, basing it in a Hindu family on the outskirts of northwest London, a property empire rather than a Danish kingdom, it makes it more specific. But actually what I find is it actually makes it more real, renders it more vivid and more grounded. And the most gratifying thing for me has been hearing people say, I always felt Shakespeare wasn't for me and I never really understood it. This is the first time I've understood it. This is the first time it's felt real and tangible. And I think specificity does that. Rather than distancing audiences through points of difference, it pulls them in through kind of authenticity. And
by being Hamlet, you get to say some of the most famous lines in the English language, the to be or not to be speech.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, isn't it? Because even people who don't know about or care for Shakespeare, they know those words. They're probably the most famous words ever written in any language ever. You know, the play itself has been performed continuously since it was written somewhere around the world.
Yeah. It's seen on stage in the Hamlet film.
Exactly. It's never stopped being performed. And so, but what I found really fascinating is when I started talking to my drama school teacher, Rob Clare, about this, is that I think that speech is massively misunderstood. You know, we think that to be or not to be, that is the question, is a speech about suicide. Broadly speaking, right? If Hamlet takes a stage, he's pointing a dagger at himself or whatever it may be. But actually, if anything, he should be pointing the dagger outwards. It's a far more confronting and radical speech than we've been taught. And then it is traditionally performed. It's actually a speech about resistance. It's a speech about, do I have the courage to fight back against injustice and oppression, even if it means I might lose everything? I might lose my life. Hence
the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune and the call to arms in a sea of troubles.
That's exactly, the active verb there is take arms. You know, to be or not to be, that is the question, saying out of context. Whether it is nobler in mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, do you keep your head down and just take it? Or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing, end them. Now, what happens when you oppose a sea? It drowns you. So what he's saying is, I can fight back, but I know this will only end one way, with my death. I mean, that's a really radical question. And so the way that we tried to film it and stage it was, I hope, as radical as those words kind of invite us to imagine.
To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether it's nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against the sea of troubles. And by opposing, end them. To die, to sleep. No more.
You know, Hamlet is driving down a motorway at 100 miles an hour in a BMW towards a massive lorry. If the speech itself is a game of chicken, when he is daring himself to go to the edge, then that's how we wanted to film it. And I hope that it invites people to reimagine and revive the kind of radical DNA of this play.
Yeah, it's a very striking way to do it, because as I started watching the film, in the back of my mind somewhere was, how are they going to do the to be or not to be speech? Because you know it's coming, and the way you did it really took my breath away. But if you've been thinking about the play and Hamlet for such a long time, had you been thinking about the way that you might play this? You know, were these words that you said in front of the bathroom mirror or anywhere else?
You know, it's so funny. It's like, what is it saying? It's like, we make plans and God laughs, right? And it's actually one of my favorite lines in Hamlet is, there's a divinity that shapes our ends. Rough hew them how we will, right? You can make all the plans you want, and I had all these thoughts and ideas, you know, going back for all these years about how I might want to do this. When it got down to it, and particularly when you're making a film, like when you're undertaking any kind of big collaborative project, it has its own momentum, it has its own parameters, its own limitations. Part of, you know, the pace and the energy with which we performed To Be or Not to Be was dictated by the fact that we could only find a certain stretch of motorway in which to film it. You know, runtime, historically, if you watch that speech in most films, sometimes it's done in voiceover, so it's a bit quicker, but it's about 5 minutes. It was like, okay, you got 2 minutes and 40 seconds to do To Be or Not to Be. So that's out of my hands, right? It's out of my hands. And actually, what I find as an actor is the fewer decisions I am making, the more that I am responding to things out of my control, the better. Because it's authentic. I'm not acting, I'm reacting. And I think that the best things happen in life when there's an element of surrender. You know, when we're forced to kind of resort to instinct rather than planning. I'll give you another example. You know, I'd been hoping to play this role for decades, you know, probably 25 years if we go back to when I was 17. And what I didn't account for is that I would have just had a baby. My wife would have just given birth. We had a newborn. I was not sleeping at all. So after years of kind of build up and anticipation, I'm going to perform these timeless speeches on 1, 2, 3 hours of sleep. I shouldn't complain about it because every time I do, my wife tells me to, you know, watch it. You know, it was much worse for her. But Anil, the director, his kid was going through a sleep regression too. So we'd had this kind of ongoing joke. We'd turn up and go, all right, how long? Last night, in 2 hours, 1 hour. I win. And actually that brought a kind of frazzled vulnerability and kind of an unraveling that was, I wasn't acting. You know, you could see that on the screen.
Yeah, and a lot of it is filmed in real close-up, so the camera doesn't miss any of that. Obviously, you're acting, but it tells us what's going on behind the scenes. So the actual motorway driving scene, how many takes? You're also doing that, so you're driving on not much sleep.
We didn't get a ton of takes on that because it was about finding a very particular stretch of motorway that we could control and all this kind of stuff with the stunt vehicles, etc. It was, you know, I think it's something interesting about that. I remember when I was doing Sound of Metal as well. We only got a couple of takes of that big drumming sequence at the start of the film.
I love that film, by the way. You were Oscar nominated for it. It's about the drummer who loses his hearing.
Right, yes. Oh, well, I'm glad you connected with it. I think there can be something magical about embracing the imperfections of like spontaneity. I'm trying to do it more and more, trying to surrender to the authenticity of the moment instead of trying to endlessly revise things with this kind of perfectionist obsession I used to have. I don't know, maybe something about fatherhood teaches you that surrender. But I remember when we did Sound of Metal, you know, I was rehearsing for that for 8 months. I didn't know how to play the drums. And we ended up having 2 takes of that. You just got to embrace it. I think it just kind of like pushes you to focus. So yeah, as much as I might kind of moan about those limitations, I think often in the end, I'm grateful for them.
Your other new project at the moment, the TV series Bait, which is on Amazon Prime. I mean, interestingly, because we've been talking about Hamlet, a great iconic character, that also has a great iconic character as part of the storyline.
Sharp Eye, are you going to be the next James Bond?
What?
Huh? Wait. It might be cut.
Can I have a look at that? Yeah, I guess I'm interested in stepping into the canon, stepping into these archetypes and subverting them and complicating them. And if anything, just adding vulnerability to them.
It's just an audition.
Super James Bond, mera shaju.
Listen, it's an audition. It's a photo from today's audition. That's all it is.
James Bond is white.
Often these characters become kind of archetypes and suits of armor. You know, that
James
we wear.
Bond in the case of Bait.
Or Hamlet or whatever it is. And actually, what I'm really interested in is like, how can we humanize them?
Do they know about the height?
What do you mean?
Are they going to give you special shoes? Like James Bond's a big, isn't he?
You know, it's interesting. When we first had the idea of kind of tying together all the personal themes of Bait, and it is a very personal show, when we had the idea of putting that all into the vessel of James Bond, everyone said, there's no way you're going to be able to do it. But it was to Barbara Broccoli's credit. We sat down with her, showed her scripts, explained to her. And I think she saw as well, actually, the show's not about James Bond. It's about, I think, a feeling that a lot of us can relate to, that life sometimes feels like one big audition. You know, and so we wanted to tell a story about someone auditioning to be James Bond, because we all, I think now with social media and LinkedIn and Zoom calls, we're always performing a more put together version of ourselves.
And the actor's on the brink of something incredible. So a huge role is within his grasp, and then his life starts to fall apart. But the Barbara Broccoli, is that because you needed her permission, or at least you needed them not to sue you? Yeah,
we needed her permission. She's never done this before. It's not been done. You know, she's never given up the Bond IP for someone to kind of make a surreal, satirical TV comedy, you know, within that playground. I think it's to her credit, and also credit our incredible writers' room. You know, we had people in that room from The Bear and Yellow Jackets and Industry, and people would work with the comedian Hassan Minhaj, and my wife, who's a novelist. And
she was in the writer's room?
Yeah, brains much bigger than mine. And we all just kind of tried to just find a way of, trying to thread this tonal kind of fusion we were going for, you know.
Yeah, and the actor's also, you know, part of a British-Asian family, so your own heritage is reflected in it. You said it was personal before, and I wondered how personal that the actor looking for the big breakthrough role, like how much of yourself did you bring to it?
Oh, I mean, so much. And again, not so much because I wanted it to be a therapy session or to feel solipsistic in that way. I just wanted to kind of be as authentic as possible, because I think that's how people end up relating to things, ironically. I mean, where to begin? I mean, in episode 1, my character has a panic attack in a music venue in London, the Kentish Town Forum. I had a a panic attack in that exact venue. I burst out of those side fire escape doors into that same alleyway where we recreated that scene. My character gets jumped and attacked as a preteen on a kind of railway overpass in a park in Wembley. That exact thing happened to me, or a version of it, on that staircase in that park in Wembley. You know, my character is approached by the security services, you know, after becoming a bit more well known as an actor, and they say, "Hey, do you want to come and work with us?" Literally, that's happened to me several times, you know, since I've started my career. It goes on and on and on, and I just kind of, honestly, it was quite scary. It felt quite vulnerable to kind of go there and share that. But I thought, if I'm going to tell a story about a character who needs to learn how to take the mask off, then I've got to do that myself. You know, there's no cheating here. I have to take the mask off myself and kind of put it all out there.
There's a moment in it that stuck in my mind where your character turns around to his family and others in his immediate circle and says, "You don't understand me, essentially. I'm trying to make a difference. I'm trying to change the world so that people don't look at you and think you're worthless." I wondered if that was personal to you, the sense that you needed to break out and do something different. Because at the time you went into the industry, there weren't very many actors of your background and heritage. And if there were, they were playing kind of like classic stereotypical post 9/11 roles.
Yeah. You know, what I love about that speech is that something feels so kind of, when we were working on that, it needed to feel both like there was a nobility in it, and also a deeply offensive condescension in it, and that this character was motivated by both those things. And honestly, I think as an artist, there is often that combination, right? You need to have an ego to think you have something to say and something to offer. But if that ego gets too big, then rather than offering and giving something, what you want is, you want to get something. You want to get that round of applause. You want to get that praise. You want to get those accolades. And so our character Shah is walking that fine line. But certainly I think I've been through periods of my life where what I think I'm seeking is other people's approval, you know, whether for myself or whether for myself or whether for my community. And actually I'd go as far as to say is that the pendulum keeps swinging back and forth, you know, depending on how much sleep you've had and how vulnerable you feel. We need that kind of hug from the culture one day, and the next day you feel actually you can give yourself that love. But
I wonder, is that because as an actor, the next role is probably always doubtful, right? You have that kind of industry. Or is it also because you think the pendulum is changing back, like the progress? You know, what you've described is just like getting to the promised land of roles that are nothing to do with your heritage. You've got there through Sound of Metal and others, but are there worries that society or the industry is rolling back on some of those things?
You know, I do think these things work in cycles. I think culture works in cycles, history works in cycles, for better and for worse. You know, I think we've been through periods where dominant culture wants to regressively assert its narratives, and we've gone through periods actually of greater collective kind of self-confidence when we're able to let, you know, 1,000 flowers blossom. I think that things never really kind of stay in one gear for too long, you know, for better and worse. So I'm not too concerned about that. What I am interested in, however, is something that I do feel is unprecedented, is the democratizing of the tools of storytelling. It's fascinating to see how some of the gatekeeping is no longer as effective as it was. Right now we have different kind of gatekeeping, you know, it's algorithmic, you know, and seeing consolidation across social media might undo some of that democratization. But actually, it's really fascinating to me to see how these kids picking up their phones can have a bigger audience than some of these institutions. And
that's a good thing.
I think it's a thing. There are good things about it. There are things about it that maybe are more concerning, but this is the reality that we're in. So I don't know if the pendulum is swinging back and forth, retracing its old steps. It's kind of like swinging into new territory, I think. And that's interesting.
Do you remember this book, The Good Immigrant? It's 10 years old. You wrote an essay in it called Airports and Auditions.
Right.
It's a very good essay.
Thank you.
And I looked at it again. And the reason I wanted to talk to you about it is because you talk about how you grew up. You say, since I was a teenager, I've had to play different characters, negotiating the cultural expectations of a Pakistani family, Brit-Asian rude boy culture, and a scholarship to private school. The fluidity of my own personal identity on any given day was further compounded by the changing labels assigned to Asians in general. Did acting come to you reasonably naturally as an extension of what you were doing in your own life?
100%. And I look back on this and I realize it's like I was playing different roles, or at least different versions of myself, right? Speaking in Urdu, wearing shalwar kameez at home, to wearing Reebok classics and, kind of fake jewelry, out on the street corner, or then school uniform, wearing a tie that belonged to Clive House, named after Clive of India, right? At school, I look back and actually it was confusing. Actually, I think it was really enriching, And for a long time, I thought of code switching as this kind of like cross to bear, but also kind of superpower, that I was forced to kind of explore these different versions of myself. I think now my hope for myself, my hope for the next generation is they don't have to code switch so much, and that they get to bring all of themselves into any room they enter.
And I think that desire to change portrayals of ethnic minorities, it's explicit in this essay, because you talk about these various stages of ethnic minority characters, the stereotype, then the subversive portrayal challenging the stereotypes, and then what you call the promised land. In the promised land, my name might even be Dave. You've got there, right? You've got to the promised land. You've been in Rogue One, one of the Star Wars films. What is still elusive?
It's interesting. I don't think of the promised land as necessarily a kind of destination. I think it's something we have to build. At least I'm realizing that now,
Hence producing, writing.
Yeah, I think
more than acting.
Not so much more, but I guess I see it all as extensions of storytelling, I've been rapping and making music since I was a teenager, and I think of that as storytelling. I think of producing and writing scripts as storytelling. I think of acting as storytelling. So I guess I'm aware that the kind of promised land I want to see might be something that me and others have to build, hence, short films like The Long Goodbye or Hamlet or Bait. And I don't know if that feels elusive, that feels exciting, that feels like the work that lies ahead.
Yeah. A lot of really tough subjects you've tackled in your work. And yet I read the other day that you said your dream is to be a stand-up comedian. I don't know if that in itself was a joke or...
No, it's interesting because I like to think that something like Nightcrawler, which is about the kind of the insatiable appetite of violence in news media, it's actually very funny. Or Four Lions, which is about, a hapless group of would-be suicide bombers. Again, it's very funny. I would like to think that kind of humor has been shot through my work, actually, that seam runs through it. Or, I don't know, I kind of like to try and change lanes and be quite genre agnostic in that way. It's quite important to me to have Bait out alongside Hamlet. I don't like being pinned down. I want to express all these different parts of myself. But you're right, particularly in America, I think, where Four Lions maybe isn't as much of a cultural touch point. Yeah, but some people might be surprised to see me do comedy. But I think people, particularly in the UK, who know the early part of my career, I think they know that's a big part of who I am.
So the mixing different things together takes me to Saturday Night Live and the fact that you're part of the UK lineup of that. What does it represent to you? Was it an immediate yes when they came to you?
Yeah, of course. I think it's a really cool opportunity to take this kind of institution and do it our own way. Do it with British humour. That feels exciting to me. I grew up on all these sketch shows. The Real McCoy, Goodness Gracious Me, Harry Enfield, The Fast Show. I'd stay up late to watch them. So I don't know. It's kind of... Possibly those sketch shows are bigger influences on me than any film.
But they've moved into the past, haven't they? That particular kind of show is not really part of British comedy anymore.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you make, you know, and I kind of think that that's a shame. And so if it requires a kind of an American institution to lend us their brand in order for us to kind of revive that tradition here, there's such a rich tradition, then I'm all for it. You know, sometimes you need a shot in the arm to kind of remember who you are. And I think that we do sketch comedy pretty well here.
What else are you working on that you can share? What's next in the portfolio?
You know, I did a film recently with Tom Cruise, directed by Alejandro Iñárritu, who made Birdman and The Revenant and is such an incredible, you know, visionary director. And that experience was really unique. And I'm so excited, not only for people to see the film, but to see it myself. I haven't seen it.
Why was it so unique?
It was unique because you've got this combination of actually obsessive perfectionists.
In the director? The
director, you've got one of the all-time greatest directors, you know, you've got Tom Cruise, possibly the most notable film star, you know, arguably, you know, top 3 in the history of cinema. And so the level of focus, attention to detail and care that they brought to every single thing, it floored me. It really floored me. And particularly Tom, his energy is that of just a world-class athlete. His completely inexhaustible reserves of energy and constantly kind of quarterbacking it, you know, constantly. I remember on one of the first days of rehearsal, I tried something out with the character that didn't quite work and I said, it didn't really work, did it? Alejandro said, no worries, but we'll keep going. Tom stopped the rehearsal to say, Riz, when you try things like that, when you're creating in that way and taking swings, I love it. Don't ever stop doing it. And he gave me a round of applause for making a mistake. And I just thought, this guy's just an inspirational leader. And it's no coincidence that he's in the place he is in because he just cares so much. That was a real lesson. It was amazing. You know, it was.
And actually, if you
inspiring.
hadn't said that, you might well have thought, that was just really embarrassing to try something out. It doesn't work in front of all these people on set. I'm never going there again.
Exactly. But actually being given permission to fail, to be messy, to try things is so crucial, not just for an actor in rehearsal, but for an executive at a company or anything, you know?
Speaking of being inexhaustible, I feel that's got to be the case with you as well, right? Look at the number of things that you're working on. And I'm sure as an actor, you're always grateful for the work. But this podcast is part of Bloomberg Weekend. So I have to ask you what yours are like, you know, husband, parent as well. What are those days of the week like?
My weekends are the highlight of my week and they're very simple. They're just very simple. They're about having breakfast together. It's about going for a walk. My kid loves going to the fishmongers. Just as I did, weirdly, I used to love going there with my mum and just looking at the fish, just touching the fish and talking. You know, he's obsessed with that. You know, just these simple kind of things, these simple rituals, traditions. It's just so grounding and it's, you know, it's what life's about. So I keep it extremely boring and very simple and quite slow. And I try and visit my parents most weekends, if not every weekend. It's very boring and extremely satisfying.
But I imagine quite hard to protect that kind of time.
It can be when you're filming in particular, because often there's things to rewrite and rework.
But even otherwise, aren't you always thinking about the next project, or there's a script you need to read, or like to actually force yourself to...
You know, it's challenging, and I think that's something that most people can relate to now, right? The working week seems to like be 7 days at this point, and disengaging from emails is like such a discipline, takes such force of will. I think something that I'm kind of rediscovering is the importance of boredom. You know, that actually the adrenal rush of being constantly active is an addiction. It's an addiction like any other. And trying to kind of like find ways of just downshifting my nervous system to appreciate stillness. It takes effort. It takes effort. And I what I'm discovering is like the bigger boundary to keep is internal rather than external. That actually, if I tell people, hey, don't contact me here, it usually won't. But there's a part of me that wants them to. There's a part of me that wants to keep riding the wave of activity. And so I think that's a learning curve that I'm on.
But that space, is that also where ideas come from, that you actually need to
100%.
try and
There's a
empty
reason
your
why the
mind?
best ideas come in the shower or the toilet seat. As you know, the toilet seat anymore because we all take our phones to the toilet, but in the shower is the last sanctuary of our imagination, isn't it? You don't have your phone on you and you're just doing something automatic. And I feel driving around in a car as well to be like where I have those eureka moments, doing the dishes, all these kinds of things, right?
You do the dishes?
I definitely, because my wife does not. I am the neat freak. So yeah, that's my, I'm very OCD about those kinds of things.
Finally, Riz, I do want to ask you about fame, because you have got fame now. When you go to the park with your kid, I'm sure there are times you're spotted and asked for a selfie. How do you deal with that side of life?
You know, I think that the level of kind of recognition I have is I'm very grateful for it. It's, you know, a couple of times a day someone will say something nice or nod or say a pleasant word, you know. Usually when you're with family, people understanding, if they want a picture, I just say, you know, I'm with family right now and move on. It's just kind of like an intermittent kind of nudge of positivity through your day. I think the bigger issue isn't kind of other people. I think it's internal. Actually, it's kind of, it can make you a bit guarded. You know, I used to just love engaging strangers in prolonged conversations. I'm just quite chatty. I'd love just chatting to
un-British way to be.
Well, I don't know, actually, you know, particularly, I mean, if you go up north, for example, I don't know, like it's about chatting to the shopkeeper, chatting to someone at the bus stop. I just love that. And I think I've stopped doing that as much because part of me wasn't sure if these people are engaging with me because they're having a pleasant chat with a random or because they recognize me or something and there's something ulterior going on. And I think it's made me a bit more guarded. I think the problem is more my own trust rather than other people's behavior, which is interesting.
And for someone who lives their life telling stories, are you storytelling to your child now?
Yeah, my child loves stories and you know, both of us are storytellers. So
yeah, your wife's a novelist.
Exactly. So
and in the writer's room, as we learned.
Exactly. Yeah. So no, it's I just you kind of like those are the things you hold on to, right? I just remember the stories that my dad would tell me growing up that have still stuck with me, and I do think a story is something kind of magical and spiritual, and it's the most profound, powerful technology we've ever created as humans. So. I don't know, I kind of feel like stories are where we find ourselves and how we recognize our similarities with characters who seemingly are nothing like us. And yeah, I'm kind of an evangelical about the power and importance of story at the heart of our culture.
Riz Ahmed, thank you so much.
Thank you.